He always doesn't hear what the master's saying. He sinks into the Sea of Galilee, as I told you last time, I think, because his faith is weak. That's a clear polemical presentation supporting the Pauline notion of salvation by faith, not by the law. If you have, incisive critical insight, you'll see if Jesus says, "Oh, your faith was weak." Paul uses the expression "weak" in his letters, and Paul's doctrine is salvation by faith, not by the law. You see, Peter, you're no good because you misunderstand the master's teaching. You don't know the master only demanded faith. So it's a critique of Peter, a backhanded critique of Peter through literary methods. But the people reading that don't realize we're doing polemical argument through using historical representation scenes to argue points out. They just think they're getting straight history. And that's one of the serious issues between faith and academic study. Yeah. When you go into the academic world, unfortunately, it may be in conflict sometimes with faith. Mine probably the most conflicted in that regard. I didn't start off that way. I believed everything in the Gospels. That is, these people must be right. Nobody ever told me it was wrong, and what they were talking about, exercising spirits, throwing them into herds of swine running off mountaintops. And this must have occurred at some point, or everyone wouldn't be acknowledging it. And as a young person, you tend to defer to your elders. But after, as Paul said, probably the best thing he said, when I was a child, I saw as a child as through a glass darkly. When I grew up, I put away childish things. And that's the difference. When you grow up, unfortunately, you have to put away childish things. And part of putting away childish things are the preconceptions, misconceptions of your ancestors and the society around you. So that's something that you have to think about. But I don't know how we got on that subject. Pseudepigrapha. Most people don't think this is pseudepigrapha. But I don't think anyone was there heard Jesus' words any more than I think Thucydides was there with a tape recorder and heard Pericles' words. And I don't think half of what Plato says Socrates said that he actually said. Maybe a quarter of what is there, but not even a half. It's Plato's own arguments put in Socrates' mouth. So I may be wrong there, because Plato is trying to be faithful to his master, I think. But that's what you're talking about, isn't it? Pseudepigrapha. Like Daniel. Daniel didn't write Daniel. Everybody knows Daniel didn't write Daniel. How do you know? You look at the knowledge there. The real Daniel is supposed to be a 6th century mystery figure. The actual person writing Daniel, you can tell from internal indicators we don't have time here to go through, it was writing in the 2nd century BC. You can tell from what he's talking about that he even says it. He tells you that he knows all about the Persians, he knows all about the Babylonians and the Medes, he knows about the Greeks, he knows that Alexander's coming, he knows it all. This isn't Daniel, this is presented as prophecy just to impress the mass. And it has done so, done its work for 2,500 years. It's been very, very effective. But the mass is very credulous. You say, well, I'm the mass. Yeah, but you're not supposed to be. You're at a university, and half of what you're supposed to be doing in the university is to be broadening your mind. So you're not supposed to be the garbage collector. I don't expect the garbage collector to use his critical intelligence to sort this stuff out. I expect him to just accept what his ancestors have told him. Same way in Baghdad streets, I expect all those crazy people to accept what their ancestors told them. But at a university, we expect people to at least wrestle with it. So that's so don't be surprised if we say, oh, I don't think Jesus said 2/3 of what he said there. I might even say 7/8, but I'll stick with 2/3 at the moment. You can decide. For the rest, you might want to say 1/3, you might want to say none, and it's all his words. It's fine. But I would, as a rule of thumb, anything, first you've got to read Paul, who historically speaking comes before the Gospels, because the authentic letters of Paul, and even those scholars say some have been cribbed, some have been, forged, or forged is an unkind word, written in Paul's name. So a certain number of the letters, almost all scholars, and I don't go into that study, I take their word for that, are from a later period. But some, everyone agrees, are authentic Paul. And the ones that are authentic Paul are Galatians, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Romans, Philippians, and I think some of Thessalonians. I think those are the ones they all agree. Everyone knows Hebrews was not written by Paul. and it's in the Paul school of thought, etc. So there are, but that's enough of a core. Those are the really key letters Paul wrote. Ephesians, I think there's questions about. But Galatians and 1 and 2 Corinthians would do it all for you. You don't even need Romans to know what Paul thought. Galatians and 1 and 2 Corinthians says it all. And if you know those letters backwards and forwards, then you can go to the Gospels and find out what Jesus is saying that is Paul inspired. And many of the parables are Pauline oriented and attacking groups that have an opposing view to that. So a lot of this is polemical literature, though it doesn't appear to the believer that way, because the believer is looking for inspirational stuff. So again, you can decide for yourself, but rule of thumb, whatever resembles Paul too closely, I would assume Jesus didn't say. So what do you mean? Paul was an enemy of the church. He was not taught properly by the church. He wasn't taught properly by the church. He claimed supernatural visions of Christ Jesus in heaven. Most of his information comes from supernatural, or what he calls apocalypsios, visionary experience. That's the word apocalypsios in Greek, means visionary experience. So I think a lot of Paul's doctrines are from these apocalypsios that he talks about, which are visions. And that's what I mean. Insofar as Jesus' sayings seem to have been understood by the other disciples, if we can call them that, in his own time, then I would say maybe you're on the road towards historicity. So again, it doesn't matter what I say, but that would be a rule of thumb to start with. That things that the other disciples don't know. I'll give you the last example we gave last time very quickly. We talked about last time the tablecloth, and I think that's the best one, where a tablecloth in the book of Acts is rolled down from heaven, clearly a mythological episode. But anyway, it's a visionary episode of the Pauline kind. And a tablecloth is rolled down from heaven, and Peter is on a rooftop in Jaffa waiting to go to the Roman centurion's house. The Roman centurion, as we said last time, being a representative of the most extreme person you would want to bring into early Christianity, someone who would be brutalizing, conquering, being very cruel to native peoples, and being perceived as a brute in some way. This one is described as someone who loves Jews, gives heavily to Jewish charity causes, is a righteous person, pious, God-fearing. Every plus accolade is put on it by the author there to say that, you know, we like Roman centurions. And then he's sending his servant to see Peter, because the author of this